Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Bufnagle the podcast, where we explore entertaining and enlightening discussions of the adventure of life and all things good. From science and technology to history and philosophy to leadership and success. We hope to give you a better understanding of the world and skills for everyone to pursue their own adventure.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Bufnagle the podcast, where we talk about all things good in the pursuit of the adventure of life. I'm Harry. I'm a host on this show, sometimes, occasionally, co-host, assistant host, something like that. I'm happy to be here, happy to be part of the crew, part of the ship, part of the crew. And I'm joined by Rafe. Rafe, how are you?
Harry, I'm fantastic. It is what do they say? It's a wonderful day to be doing a podcast with you. And one reason for that, Harry, is that we have the world's greatest listeners. They have made us a global top 10% podcast. As usual, you can reach us at bufnagle at bufnagle.com. Remember to share the love, share the buff, give us a 5-star review, subscribe, like, hit the smiley star button, hit all those little buttons on your podcast app machine that make our lives better. So think about, how can I make life better for the people at the Buff? That's what you're going to hit those buttons. And remember, tell a friend to listen and you will get a free episode. Leave us a 5-star review, like you said. And there's a little button there. You can buy me a coffee, which would be a great thing or maybe a glass of milk, Harry, like you got.
That's right. I'm having cookies and a glass of milk.
Yeah.
And I don't think a glass of milk costs $5. So you can get me
you can do whatever you want.
8 or 9 of them.
It is open season there it's one of these things that we give that option to the people out there. You can hit the button in the show notes, buy us a coffee, and life will be a wonderful thing. Harry, we have a wonderful show today. Another big brain smart head on the show with us again. That's the only kind of people we bring on the show here. We are graced we are graced again. The presence of one Father Elliot Zach, associate pastor at Our Lady of Mount Carmel here in Carmel, Indiana. Father Zach, how are you tonight?
I'm doing well. It's good to be back with you, Rafe, and also with you, Harry. Yeah.
So, so you've been well.
I have been, yeah.
Okay, that's good to hear you, and you look good. And you finished your dinner.
Finished it up.
You got delicious dessert, and so now we're
all your vegetables.
Yeah, this is
ate all my veggies.
He did finish the chicken pot pie and all the veggies contained therein. We got some questions that came into us, and then we forward them on to you, and we put you on the hot seat here to speak.
It's like a final exam at seminary. That's kind of how I think.
This is what final oral exams are like. Okay, we're going to start. Okay, and we sent you some of these beforehand, so you could think about them. This is not. Otherwise, that wouldn't be fair. I mean, come on. Okay, so you get a chance to look these up because these are in that book of questions, right?
Sure, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, all right. So here's the first question. How does one justifiably use one's conscience to deviate from official church teaching? It has to be more complicated than just saying, well, I thought about it and my conscience says that it's okay for me, so that's all good, right? That seems to me that's kind of lame. That seems like a cop-out.
Sure.
And I think this idea of what would be the right word, of invoking one's conscience as to deviate, that's a pretty serious thing. Absolutely. So how do we know when we've done that right, as opposed to just using it as a get out of jail free card?
Yeah, it's a great question because it can be used as a trump card sometimes, just to justify you doing whatever you want, kind of, right? So conscience, I think it's got to be grounded or anchored in something, or namely in the truth. So conscience has to be formed. I think maybe the best image for it would be a compass. So if my compass points to true north, then I'll be able to find my way. If not, well, then it's pretty useless to me, right? And so it's the same with the conscience, right? A conscience that's well formed is pointing to true north, and so I can use that then properly and allow it to prick me when in a proper way, so that I can follow it. But if it's not formed, it's as good as a compass that's broken, basically. So we're on for forming that, right?
So how would one form one's conscience then?
Yeah. So, at least from a Catholic perspective, you're going to look at the teachings of the church. But in general, you're going to look at honestly seeking the truth, right? But again, as a Christian or a Catholic, you're going to look to the magisterium, the teaching authority of the church. So, from that perspective, I'll try and use that to form my conscience according to the truth, right? So, use my mind, use philosophy and theology and the teaching of the church to kind of form this, right? So if in forming my conscience I come up against something that's contrary to church teaching, would actually it would show, okay, there's some formation of the conscience that needs to happen here, and I'd actually need to submit to the church teaching rather than or kind of flesh that out a little bit. So I hope that might make sense.
So do you see? Go ahead, Harry.
Yeah, I was going to say, you mentioned in there, finding the truth and finding what is good. And a lot of times these days, people always talk about, well, I want to live my truth.
Yeah.
Can you go into a little bit about the difference between saying, hey, Father, I'm going to go live my truth, and because my conscience has been so dirtied and muddled that I can't tell what true north is anymore.
Yep.
So therefore, I think things are okay, versus what the church teaching says.
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, we would hold that there is an absolute or objective truth out there, right? For someone to say my truth, it gets in this thing called relativism, right? Which is self-defeating, actually, because it's holding an absolute while saying that there aren't absolutes, right? But that in self defeats. If you hold it to its own principle, it defeats itself, right? So we would hold, okay, there is objective truth out there, and so we want to kind of form our mind to that, and that's hard, that's difficult, right? But we have some helps on that. From a Christian perspective, again, we'd look at Scripture, but we'd also look at tradition and church teaching to kind of hone that in, and then things that are good, true, and beautiful, right? Objectively good, true, and beautiful, to try and form the conscience. So, but it can be painful at times when we're forming our conscience, because it requires us to make changes sometimes. But Saint Augustine once said, if I'm only picking and choosing the things I like from the gospel, then I don't actually believe in the gospel. I believe in myself, right? And so that might be one. That's again, maybe he's getting at that point where, when push comes to shove, that can be a painful situation, because the truth might cause me to have to make some changes in my life. But they're always worth it, I'd say, right?
Sure, they set you on the right path.
Correct.
Yep.
So you had mentioned things like this. This is a difficult. Yeah. This can be a difficult thing. I mean,
sure.
It shouldn't be difficult, but it is, and that's because of our the state that we're in. We are not. We're not fully aligned, and that makes things difficult. And,
yep.
And I'm gonna that kind of leads into this other question that we sent there, and it. The way we phrased it this way is why does God give us appetites for things that aren't necessarily aligned with us staying aligned with Him? So lust is the obvious example, right? I mean, that's a very easy one, but there are a lot of people are tempted in lots of different ways to do lots of things that we know take us down the wrong path, or maybe we don't know, maybe they don't know, but they're just still doing things that are taking them down the wrong path.
Sure.
But why must we wrestle so with God? Is that a consequence of our fallen nature, or is that a consequence of our human nature, which is fallen? But is it?
Sure.
Are those this? What if Adam and Eve would have stayed in the garden?
Yeah.
Would they have wrestled?
So they're created in an original state of original justice, original harmony with God, with each other, with themselves internally, and with creation even, right? So there's a perfect harmony there, and everything's properly ordered, including our appetites at that point. But when sin enters the world, the consequences are far reaching. And sometimes we don't give this enough thought, I think. But this might be one of those manifestations of that, right? There's now disharmony in all of those things: disharmony between us and God, disharmony within ourselves, disharmony with others, disharmony with creation. And so now there's an antidote with that, right? The Lord himself and grace, God's grace to kind of heal and transform our wounded human nature. But even after we receive baptism, there's still this thing called a tendency to sin, right?
Concupiscence.
Concupiscence, exactly. So, and this would be a manifestation, I think, of concupiscence, that we still have these desires that aren't properly ordered, right? And there's still a conflict within us, right? And so we've got to fight against that. The more we receive God's grace, the more that can change and transform us, right? So you hear these stories, for example, of St. Francis being good with animals, for example. It's a shade of going back to, he's so in tune with God's grace. It's not that St. Francis was a hippie, right? He wasn't a hippie. He was just so in union with God that there's a harmony now between him and even creation. Of course, we see it within his own soul, with others, the charity he displayed toward others, and then, of course, with his relationship with the Lord himself. But you see a little pulling aside of the veil in the sense with that. There's a proper ordering, but it requires our will cooperating with God's grace, right? But yeah, until we're 6 feet underground, I think we're going to have some struggle with keeping those properly aligned.
Would you say then that there is, because I found for me that the more and more I attempt to align myself, the more that the temptation unaligning not being in alignment, the greater that temptation presents itself. Is that a spiritual warfare component of trying to stay on the path?
Yeah, I think it is, especially at the beginning. Although I will say, when you habituate yourself in virtue, it eventually becomes easier, right? And when it's imbued with God's grace. So, absolutely, at the beginning, I think it's both a spiritual warfare component, but it's also, there's a death to self at that point, and so we're kind of experiencing that death within ourselves, and so. Part of us is fighting against that, right? Fighting to the death, quote unquote, right? Mm-hmm. So, but again, once you start to habituate in virtue, it actually becomes easier and easier, and something you delight in eventually. So it becomes easier to choose the good, to choose the virtue, to live in that way, and eventually, if someone is really quite along the path with that. It would almost do violence to go back, to the person, to kind of revert back in that way. But yeah, absolutely. I would say at the beginning, for sure, there's a fight,
And it's probably good that there is a fight.
Yeah.
Instead of just, because if there's not a fight, then you're not even sure. You're not even sure what you should be doing. If you don't feel that there's a fight there, that's probably. You're not even recognizing that the good side is there.
Absolutely, yeah. In a sense, too, it's a good sign. Okay, I'm making a turn toward the Lord. I'm making a turn toward goodness. So you're right, but yeah, when you feel the fight, it's actually, even though it's hard, it's a good sign, right?
Mm-hmm. So who's the guy that wrestled it
in the scripture?
In the scripture, yeah,
it'd be Jacob.
Jacob wrestled with God. No, do you have that story on the top of your head?
I don't have it quite on the top of my head, but yeah, he's wrestling and he gets his hip knocked out of place, and
yeah. And so what's the understanding of the reading of that? I mean, because this was at night, right? And a spirit came to him and started just wrestling him, or making him do something, or
sure. If I recall, I think it's listed in Scripture as an angel of the Lord, or a messenger of the Lord, right? It's a mysterious figure, right? Because it seems, is it the Lord himself he's wrestling with? Because he does seem to say something like that afterward. He was wrestling with the Lord. I don't have the full context right now with me, but I do think there is like, we do some wrestling with the Lord, right? In this, and just like in a lot of relationships, and to kind of see our relationship with the Lord as a deep friendship, right? And so it's okay to wrestle with him a little bit. Of course, the ultimate goal is realizing like he is the Lord. He is King of Kings, Lord of Lords. He's best friend. And so I want to follow him. But absolutely, there's some wrestling. I would say for my own life, vocational discernment felt like wrestling with the Lord for a few years, right? And it does sometimes feel like you can get your hip knocked out of place or something. But there's always deep joy with that. So it'd be kind of more of an analogical way to look at the reading there, but I'd have to dig back in to get better insight on it.
So with so many of these appetites that tend to pull us away, there's so much. What does it say in Genesis? We looked on the fruit and saw that it was good. It would be pleasing. It's pleasing to the eye and it would taste good, right? Yep. So there are so many things that look like they could be defended as well. Well, this is a good thing. Look, I'll have another brownie. They were good brownies, right?
Sure.
And I can go in that direction. And it's like, well, look, my wife made the brownies for me, and it would be a sign, So you start doing these
Absolutely.
Justifications and things, and so there's kind of a wrestle there.
Absolutely.
And so what's the process for finding out that? I mean, it comes back to this conscience thing, right? And knowing where you should go, and like you said, truth, beauty, and goodness, and what does the truth say? It seems to me like if I wrestle with God, I will not pin him, right? And so at some point, I'm hoping at best they just call it a draw, but really what I need to do is I need to submit.
Yeah.
Isn't that what we get to? To
surrender, for sure. Yeah, for sure. But, I suppose I see the relationship with the Lord much more like him as a father and as a real young child. Seeing myself as a young child, right? And so like it can be a playfulness to it, right? And in the way the Lord will wrestle with us. And so there can be a playfulness in which he'll seed to us sometimes, if it's not harmful to our soul, right? And I think that's one way you could kind of look at it, right? Because you're correct. I mean, there's no way we'll beat him in a sense, but I like framing it more in a playful way. I think it sheds a lot of light on it with that regard. So that might be one way to look at it. But the whole movement of the Christian life is to get my will in union with God's will, right? To surrender to the Lord. And for sure, sometimes he asks a lot of us at certain points. Absolutely.
And a lot of the feeling is why, right? I mean, there's a lot of the question is how.
You keep mentioning like why, and I love, Father Zach, that you brought up the father playing with the son kind of thing, because that was exactly what I was going to say. Yeah. Is that I will play wrestle with Andrew, and I will pin him, and I will tickle him, and he goes from, and it's all laughter, it's all giggling. He kind of understands his place where he is, and I understand my place, and then kind of like you said, every once in a while I'll turn on my back so that he understands what the whole motion is. And it's not about trying to make him submit, but when he does submit in that environment, he is happy and he's joyful.
Yeah. I like that image a lot. And, of course, throughout our life, the why question comes up, but, again, I love the child imagery. The Lord says, unless you become like little children, you shall not enter the kingdom of heaven. And so it's like this humble confidence in the Father and in the Father's loving care. So oftentimes a child won't even worry about the why question, or there might be a little lingering one, but then eventually it's like it's his mom and dad. They don't even realize, the full context of everything. So I think the humble confidence and the childlikeness is kind of key to that. for us in growing in trust in the Lord. He can do far more than we ask or imagine, and to really believe in his goodness in that way. But I like the childlike imagery to help us with that. And I think approaching a why question that way is the best way. It's just like, you know what? At the end of the day, I'm like a little child, and I'm just going to trust my Father here, that I know that he wants the best for me.
And that's hard.
Absolutely.
That's the hard part, right? I mean, because it strikes me that there's so many times where it's very obvious to me. Like if someone came, I have whatever question I have. And if someone came to me and asked me the question, I'd be like, I know what to do. I mean, it's very easy. You ought to do A.
Yeah.
Why are you even thinking about doing B? But there's the temptation to do B.
Sure.
It's there. And when it's you, it's easy from the outside to point, say, it's very easy to know what you want to do, which is B, and what you ought to do, which is A. Hopefully you can make those two align, but
Absolutely.
Sometimes they don't.
Absolutely.
And how do you bring yourself to subjugate that want? Right? That's the thing, right? Is I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
I don't want to, right? And I think a lot of us have that. That happens. I mean, that's right. And then we turn, right? That's the turning away. That's the missing the mark. That's the sinning. And it's because we choose what we want instead of what we ought. But that doesn't. But it feels like I said, it looks good. It's going to taste good, right? And it's right,
Absolutely.
I love that story, right? We talked about the great comedy that's in the Bible. Really, there it is, because that story of Adam and Eve in the garden, that describes every choice of sin that follows, and that's how do you where do you put your foot in the ground on that? How do you get yourself to go back to the other side, other than just quitting and just swallowing that?
Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, if sin tasted like rat poison, then we wouldn't do it, right? So
there's a quote for you.
Exactly. There you go. So, but I think it's the surrender to the Lord. And I think too, another image maybe is just realizing like contact with the Lord transforms us, right? So think of a fire that changes everything into itself. We use that image, particularly the image of the burning bush in Genesis, where there's a fire that doesn't destroy the bush. I think it's a really good image for God as well, because when we're close to Him, we begin to there's transformation that happens, right? So we take on the properties of the fire, right? We begin to think like the Lord, speak like Him, act like Him, forgive like Him, love like Him. While still not only remaining ourselves, but becoming really who He created us to be. But the essence for us is to stay close to the fire, right? And that's more of it, because He's the one who will conquer in us. He's the one who will conquer sin in us, right? So rather than just being a force of the will, I got to exercise my will. I got to turn to the Lord. I got to cooperate with His grace. But the real key is letting Him do that work in us, right?
The vision that's in my head as you're saying these things is the prodigal son.
Yeah.
Right. And his, he does all this debauchery, and he goes, and he just, like these, I love these stories.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to my dad and I'm going to say this: I sinned against God. I sinned against you. Please, I'm sorry. Absolutely. And when he turns back. And his father watches him. He sees him coming from a distance and runs toward him. Mm-hmm. And, he gives the little speech. And it's just, to me, I have this image of this very large man taking his arms in this huge cloak and just wrapping, just completely engulfing the son in that. And the trick is to turn back, right? Yep. Sin turns you away. Yep. It misses the mark. Get back to the mark.
Yep.
And that requires, like you said, it requires all those things we don't want to do, which is be humble, which is admit wrong. And he says what you should say, right? Yep. And that's the way to break out of that and get back. But man, that's hard. He would rather eat the stuff that the pigs were eating than have to go back and admit that. But he does.
You're right. Yeah. And he was in the pigs, but it tells more too. It tells as much about the father as it does about the son. Right. because it's a Jewish context, and he's been with the pigs and touching the pigs and smelling like a pig, right?
Right.
And yet he's still totally embraced. And the father doesn't even actually let him finish the statement that he was saying, right? So it tells a little bit about both, but I think you're absolutely right. It's like, no matter how many times you fall, just keep turning back to the Lord. There's a saying, a saint isn't someone who's perfect, but someone who gets right back up and on the path with the Lord, right? Every saint had a past or needed the grace of the Lord, I guess we could say. But every sinner has the possibility of becoming a saint. So,
well, and that's the real hope, right? And that's when we talked about last time you were here. We talked a lot about justice and mercy.
Yeah.
And we tend to forget the mercy at the last. We talk about the last judgment. We don't talk about last mercy.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
but they're both there. And you said that's the hope. That's the constant hope that you have there is to be able to get yourself back there, is to choose to go back toward the mark.
Absolutely.
And so, okay, Harry, do you have any more on that? Because I'm going to ask another question.
No, I have a lot of different segues we can go down with just that part, but I think going on to the next question is fine.
You want to?
No, it's okay. It's
all
okay.
Right. I will segue without that little machine that drives you around. Remember when we did the Segway tour, Harry?
I do.
Okay, that's very fun. Have you done a Segway tour?
I've never done a Segway tour.
The Segway is, well, here's the segue into Segways. The Segway is the ultimate urban
mind control machine.
Well, it's almost like a mind control machine. It's for touring the city.
Okay.
Because you stand there and it sits there, and then
do you have control though?
Yeah. You just kind of lean forward.
Okay.
And as you lean, it starts moving forward. It's like mind control. He's like, oh, I better slow down. So you just lean backwards, it stops. You lean back a little bit forward, it goes backwards. You lean to the right, goes to the right. Lean to the left, goes to the left. It's just awesome. It's just awesome.
Okay.
I
feel like I would face plant this thing.
It's hard to do that. It's hard. They're wonderful machines. But anyway. Okay. Segue. Okay.
That's his birthday present.
Okay, so here's one. Okay,
yeah.
And this is a hard one to ask because I'll tell you why it's a hard one to ask. How do we deal with people? Essentially, let's say, for example, a great example is bad clergy who are not they're very visible. You're very visible in your role.
Yeah.
There's a high bar for you to maintain, right? And people sometimes miss the mark.
Yeah.
But sometimes they miss it like.
Way off.
Yeah, way off. Okay. So how do we deal with people who fail very publicly and give the faith a bad name? All right. So we're all, and the reason that's hard to say is because we're all sinners and we all give the faith a bad name sometimes, but some people do it more
prominently,
more publicly than others. Yeah.
Yep.
So how do we deal with these members of our flock that are not particularly good representatives of our group? They're like, somebody will say, well, I used to be Catholic, but there was this guy at our church who did something bad and therefore I'm out. And that seems to me like that's not the right approach.
It seems like you're searching for Venerable Fulton Sheen's quote.
Tell me what that would be. Which one?
Which is, there are not 100 people in the world that hate the church, or I forget exactly what, but there are not so many people that hate the church, but there's probably only 100 people in the world that truly hate the church. You're gonna have to edit all of this out, but it's basically that there's a lot of people out there that hate the church for what they think it is and not what it truly is.
Right. And so how do we defend it well in the context of well, what do they say? If the fact that everybody in the church has been trying to destroy the church for 2,000 years and hasn't succeeded is evidence of its supernatural nature. Yeah. Right. So how do what's the best defense against that? Because we all fail, right? And I'd like to put on a better face, but sometimes we don't do that.
Yeah, there's two thoughts or two images that come to mind. One is a gym, like you go to the gym to work out, right? Yep. And when you go there, there's a lot of unthin people. There's a lot of fat people there, right? So, but there's also people there that are fit, right? People that are working according to the program and everything. Just because I see a bunch of fat people at the gym, that shouldn't give me the excuse to leave the gym, right? What I want to do is I want to look at the ones who are fit, who are following the program, and I want to follow their lead, right? So maybe you can use that as an analogy there, sin as this fatness, right? But the fit ones being the saints, to kind of look to them as the encouragement. Now we can grieve the evils that people do. Absolutely. I think that'd be something to bring in prayer to the Lord, and it's proper to grieve that with him. But the other image that I would think of just left my mind, actually. So let me see if I got it here.
What we could do is typically at this point, I take a little snippet of elevator music and stick it in the show to make it sound like you're thinking. But
here it is. I got it. All right, so
perfect.
I'm thinking of the mystical. It kind of goes back to your point of like, okay, at the end of the day, yeah, we can grieve that there's sin in the church, that there's sinful people in the church. But okay, what can I do to change myself to more align with the Lord? And think of the image of the mystical body. We're members of the mystical body. And so the encouragement would be, okay, there are some cancerous cells in the mystical body. Absolutely. But let's be a healthy cell ourselves, and to kind of live in that way, to help bring about the healing of the mystical body of Christ, the healing of the members of the church, because God's grace can do so much more than sin. For us not to forget that when we see the evils that even people that should be, very exemplary people might commit in the church. So that's probably the two things I would throw out as ways to approach it. But.
Okay, well, that's great. Now, and you mentioned saints.
Yeah.
And there was I saw an announcement yesterday or today of the announcement that there's a beatification coming, I guess is what I said.
Carlos Acutis.
Who's that?
Carlos Acutis. He's a patron saint of the internet, more or less.
Okay, and what did he do, Harry?
He was well known for documenting Eucharistic miracles.
And he died a young man. Is that right?
Died 15 or so.
Yeah. 15. Born the same year I was born. So.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, and you're double what he is now.
Correct.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're all living on borrowed time. All right. Okay. So here's a saint, and here's a young man who lived a virtuous life.
Yeah.
But being a saint is not necessarily living a virtuous life. I mean, like you would like to do that, and eventually we get there. But the whole point is where are they now?
Sure.
Right. And there's a process for sainthood.
Yeah.
Or for I guess I think of it this way.
I would say canonized saints.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So there's a document for being declared.
Yeah.
Right. So is it possible for people to be canonized who may not have been fully in the throes of our little club, our little Catholic club, or do they have to be in there? Obviously they don't have to, God can bring anybody to heaven that he wants to do. So, that's beyond our reach. But does the church have any restrictions on who can be canonized in that realm?
Great question. Yeah. So I suppose theoretically it's not impossible. The church has never canonized someone who's not a Catholic. Canonization simply means a recognition that they're in heaven. Yep. But it's a pretty strict process. So they do look actually for this thing called heroic virtue. Okay. In the person's life, and they'll investigate as much as they can from their lives and ask people around their lives, people who knew them or had stories about them, and they'll designate one person literally called the devil's advocate, right? Mm-hmm. Whose whole case is to say, why wouldn't we canonize this person? So you got to prove that there is heroic virtue there, and then you need 2 miracles that are not scientifically explainable for them to be officially canonized. So could the church technically canonize someone who wasn't Catholic? I suppose technically speaking, she could. She's never done it so far. And part of it too is to propose somebody who lived according to the ideals of the church. So I don't necessarily see it ever happening, but maybe if someone was a martyr for something, I mean, you'd have to be a martyr for the Lord, I suppose. So theoretically, is it possible? I guess it's possible.
Those, in that realm,
Yeah,
there are a lot of things that are possible. But it's okay. Well, that's excellent. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Harry, do you have any segues out of that thing?
You did mention those two criteria, right? The two miracles and then heroic virtue. I do know that the church has at least beatified, I forget exactly when this was, but the entire family as saints, including the unborn child.
Yeah, that was last year. That's good. Good memory, Harry. Yeah, there was a Polish family, the Ulma family, were baptized last year. And you're 100% right. They even baptized the unborn child in the womb of the mother, who was, the whole family was killed for protecting and hiding Jews during the Second World War. And when they were discovered, they were all killed, and they found that she was pregnant with a child. And so the church decided last year, when they were beatifying the whole family, to beatify the unborn child as well. So.
Now, beatification versus canonization.
Yeah, so it's a step in the process to canonization. So first you investigate the life and prove that there's heroic virtue, and then you have to get one documented miracle that's not scientifically explainable. That then they would go to beatification, and they'd be called blessed. Then you need one more miracle documented and not scientifically explainable, and then they could canonize them as saints. So it's
then when you're in heaven, you get your recliner. You're all done. You've got your two miracles.
Well, I don't know about that.
It's a massage recliner. That's what you get. That's right.
So don't do that. Call them even more. Then now they're working.
Have you seen the Simpsons episode where Marge goes to Protestant?
Sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right, that's fun stuff. All right, wonderful. It is. Wow, we are out of time. We could continue this conversation a long time, I think, and I hope that we will continue it again sometime in the future, probably in 2025.
Be great.
It is our honor to have you here. Thank you very much again for coming.
You're most welcome. Yeah, always an honor and a joy to be with you and talk with you and laugh with you.
Thank you very much, Harry. Like I said, it's a great day to be doing a podcast with you.
It is. I appreciate it. Thanks, Father Zach, for being here. Thanks, Rafe, for the kind words. And we remind all of our listeners to seek the good, live virtuously, and flourish, and enjoy the adventure of life. It's going to be a great day.